Okay, let's begin. I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. My name is Kevin Cope. I will kind of be the MC today, introduce our presenter here in a few moments. Let's do a few housekeeping things as we get started. You'll note on your desktop there'll be a thing that looks very similar to this. If you have a question, please type the question in here into the box and then hit send. And at some point, we will answer your question. If we don't get to it during the webinar, we will have a response back to you sometime after the webinar is over. So just kind of walk you through some of the things that Brenntag has been doing as far as our webinar series. These are some of the topics that we've touched on: heavy metals, anti-scalants, oily waste, foam control, which was sponsored by the AWT, coagulation, flocculation, and successful jar testing. These are all available in PDF form, and some are available in audio-visual form. Just to kind of recap, and the successful jar testing kind of lends itself to a precursor for this particular presentation. And these are just some of the topics that we touched upon during our successful jar testing. So today, I'd like to introduce our presenter today. His name is Tom Dobson. Tom is the Brenntag Water Additives Manager for Brenntag Northeast. I've known Tom for about 15 years. It's a pleasure to get to work with Tom on this particular presentation. Tom attended St. John's University on a full scholarship for baseball for all 4 years. He holds a BA in English and a minor in chemistry. He has 26 years experience in the water treatment industry with knowledge in boiler and cooling water treatment, along with industrial wastewater, municipal water, and municipal wastewater. He also has experience in pulp and paper applications. Tom joined Brenntag in August of 2016, again as the water additives manager for Brenntag Northeast. The photo here shows Tom with his wife Kara, their son Tommy, who is 5, and their daughter Layla, who is 3. In his spare time, Tom I know enjoys spending time with his family, but he also enjoys hunting, fishing, and playing golf. And his handicap, according to Tom, has gotten much higher after the arrival of 2 children. So with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Tom and let Tom walk you through Brenntag's presentation today on conducting a successful plant trial.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. Good morning on the West. As Kevin said, my name's Tom Dobson. I've had 26 years of water treatment experience, primarily in the Northeast, although I did get down into the Southeast in some accounts. So let's begin. Our topic today is conducting a successful plant trial in water clarification. Here's our roadmap, the application roadmap that we use. We're going to discuss some definitions here. Precipitation is a function causing soluble substance to become insoluble in solution, followed by coagulation, which is the act of particle charge neutralization, which allows insoluble particles to gather and become larger. Next, we have flocculation, which is taking those smaller particles and making much larger particles to either float or settle. And the last step is dewatering of the sludge or particles that we formed in the clarification process. Now, every successful trial has to begin with a jar test. And this is a procedure that simulates as best we can the actual process of the wastewater treatment plant. In that, we will use differing chemical doses and mixing speeds, and then also monitor settling times or floating times, whatever be the case. This is a way of estimating or providing a estimate of parameters in the water treatment program. How do I go back? Sorry about that. So what we're trying to do in the jar test is duplicate the system operation, check product performance, make system adjustments, make treatment recommendations, and determine the best program available to us. In this process, it's important to make very good notes, as we'll cover in a little bit, but also you want to be able to show your customer once you've arrived at a process you believe is the best, to help get them to buy in, and this is another thing that we're going to discuss later. Now, Thomas Edison's principles are a very good way to look at jar testing. You understand your customer's problems and get commitment, and iterate quickly to find a solution. And what we mean by that is you're going to run multiple tests and run them as quickly as you can to find a solution, and the purpose of running the multiple tests is to be sure that you've come to the best solution for your customer. And another way to look at jar testing is I have not failed, I have simply found 10,000 ways it didn't work. Our webinar today, we're going to discuss clarification and dissolved air flotation. What are your customers' goals? This is important in your pre-jar test meeting with your customer, and then you want to also cover these things as you move through into the trial phase. You want to know, are their goals to meet discharge regulations to avoid fines? Is it to improve the operations? To provide cost savings? Is it a new application? Is there an effort to reuse the water that you're clarifying? Is it a safety issue? For example, are they currently feeding a chemical that they'd rather not handle and get away from? There could be other reasons, but those are all things that you need to qualify with your customer to be sure that you have a very clear understanding of what their goals are and what your goals should be. Now, this helps gain your customer's commitment, and what you want to do is have them agree with you as to what will constitute a successful trial. You want to provide a written game plan or proposal with agreed upon metrics, and then what the next step would be at the conclusion of the trial. And at that point, we hope we will have attained the new business. So we get customer involvement, management involvement, and this is important. You really need to know, just like any other sales situation, you want to know who the decision maker is, and also who needs to be included in all updates on the trial. It's important to know the customer's schedule, in particular if that person, the decision maker, may only have time to see you at lunchtime or at the end of the day or first thing in the morning. It's important to know that so that you're not just standing around waiting for them or barging in on a meeting or making them feel that you're putting them out. It's also very important to have operator involvement, and that being the people who actually will be charged with the day-to-day operation of your chemical program moving forward. It's important to know their workforce schedule, and then management update schedule. Who receives it and how to present that to the person. That be, again, what time of the day, or would they prefer an email, or would they like an oral follow-up. In either event, I would always recommend that you follow it up with written communication, either email or in a letter after you've met with the person, just to rehash everything and put it down on paper, what was discussed and any objections or agreements that you had in those discussions. Now, it's important to determine what the length of the trial will be. And in that, you're going to need to know manpower, both from your end as the supplier as well as the customer, and that would be the shifts or operators and what their schedules might be. The length of the trial is going to dictate how much product you're going to need on hand. Your operating conditions come into play. For example, if you had a winery who does most of their bottling or packaging in the fall, that's most likely when they're going to see an increase in their wastewater influent. The production schedule may have something to do with it. Again, that's a good example. But it could be also that one shift over another produces more water just because of the way their process works. And then, of course, you need to know your plant personnel schedule based on these factors. Now, this is an important point that I can't stress enough. You want to make sure that you get your product to your customer in good condition. You want to know the receiving days and times and make sure that the product is properly stored. I had personally a trial fail on me because I had product freeze in transit and wasn't aware of it until we got to the bottom of the barrel and found out that the product had crystallized and that we were not feeding as concentrated a solution as we wanted to, and as a result did not get our desired results in the trial. And this is important, and as this could have helped us pick this up, you want to retest using the product that arrived and is waiting to be put online for your trial. You're going to compare those against your samples that you use to jar test to come to this decision or treatment program to begin with, but then you also take the product you have on hand and jar test a sample with that and compare the results of between the two. Next, we've got to discuss the feed system that you have. We want to know, is it a new existing system? Who owns the current feed system? And this is important. It could be a competitor, and the competitor may not want you applying your trial using their equipment. So it's good to know that ahead of beforehand, so that you can make sure you have equipment in place to deliver your product during the trial. Make sure the equipment's sized properly, that it's accessible, it's in the correct location. Was it installed correctly, either by the customer or by the supplier who supplied the equipment? Then make sure it's operation tested, and does it need to be cleaned? And this could be important in the event that you have a product that might adversely react with the existing chemistry. Could either lead to a clogged line, or on the worst case scenario, we have some type of reaction that would cause gassing or fuming. Need to know how quickly you're going to turn over the treatment. And what we mean by that is, how long will it take for the point you introduce your product for you to begin to see the results in the system? The way to do that, another way to look at this, is to check proper feed checks and dosages using drawdown tubes. These are very important and very helpful in calculating that you are delivering exactly what you want in the way of product to the system. Make sure your feed points are proper and that where you would like them to be, depending on how your jar test results were. Maybe the feed point that they're currently using doesn't allow for the same type of vegetation that you found, that if you move the addition point back further in the system, gives you better mixing and better performance. You want to take your measurements of the existing chemistry before starting. And what I mean by that is that you've got the incumbent product online. You want to take their measurements of what they're feeding, how much they're feeding, the feed points, and then the results, and then record these results. And you want to start a log now. This is the beginning of a log that's going to help you in proving your point that your product performed the way we wanted it to. Now, your system parameters are going to be part of this log. You have the agreed upon analytics that you went over with your customer. You have system flows and your plant production. All these things you want to note on your log. You want to obtain your samples before starting, correctly label them, and store them properly. If your customer will allow, as you know, some of them do not want cameras in their plants, take a photograph, but of course you want to obtain approval first and get a general feel of the overall operation. Now, here we're going to discuss the re-jar test to verify. And what you can see here on these two pictures is we have the original results on the left. This is the original jar test, and the trial startup on the right. And as you can see, we're getting similar reaction, similar clarity, and particle size. All of this would indicate that we have matched what we did in our jar tests once before. Now, this is critical. You want to redo the math. You've done all your jar testing, you've dosed. Now you're going to check your math to make sure that you can dose everything according to what you just did in your jar test. You want to confirm your dilutions, confirm your feed rates. Check your feed points again and have multiple feed point options. As I mentioned before about where the product is added, does it perform better in a different location? And then you want to have different sample points from which to sample either effluent or, as we'll see later, sludge levels. You want to photograph your tests, your operations, and record the date and time. You want to measure and record your feed rates, flows, operating conditions, and as much information as possible that you can put into your log without it becoming too verbose. You record your drawdown rates during this time. Now, this is a good video to show you how to isolate a drawdown tube. What you'll see here is you're going to turn off the main flow to the pump, open up the drawdown tube, which now the pump will begin drawing out of the drawdown tube. At this point, you want to make sure you have a stopwatch in hand and note as soon as you open that valve the time that it was that you open it, or press start, and then for a defined time you're going to allow that to draw down and measure how far down it went. And this is a good picture here. You can see the drawdown tube up close, and this is what it looks like as you're drawing down. And again, this is a specified time, and you're noting how many milliliters in that time. And depending on an application, that could be, you might be able to run a minute. It could be that in a large application, like when you get into a paper mill where you're talking millions of gallons, only 15 or 30 seconds may be enough to draw down because the rate of the product is fed. So then the next step, you want to do this. This is just part of good housekeeping, because you have to remember that you're not the only one who's probably going to be accessing this equipment. The operator will probably be doing his own checks, and you want to make sure you leave this the same way you found it. So this is how to refill a drawdown tube. You're going to open the valve from the feed tank, leaving the valve to the drawdown tube open, and you'll see the level will rise back up. We're going to go all the way to the 0 point up at the top there, and then you close it, and then be sure to open that, keep that valve open to the drawdown, the feed tank, so that you don't air bind your pump. Now, this is a jar test recording chart, and there's several things to point out here. You notice we have our product, we have our dosage, we have a rating of the performance, and this is a subjective rating. Then we have our flocculant and the dosage and the rating on that. And then we have an overall rating, and we like to use a numbering system. In this case, we went 1 through 4 because we had 4 samples, so 1 being the best and 4 being the worst. So here's your hard data. You've got your product with the dosage. You've got your rating subjective, as we said, of very good, poor, good. And then this is the next step, our trial log. Now, I want to point to you, first, you'll have the previous data. Then the day you began in time. And then you're going to see any upset conditions that you had during your trial. You want to have recorded what happened. If you look down here, you can see there was an unexpected caustic dump during this part of the trial. This is very important. It helps you detail in your summarization of the trial what happened, when it happened, and why it happened. You'll find that your customer is much more happy to move on with your program if you have a very good understanding of what occurred during the trial, why it occurred, and the result. And then it'll also prepare you for future reactions to take as a result. Now, to check the overall treatment and performance, we're going to check your mixing and dosing, and this is just grabbing a sample out of the process itself, putting it on your jar stirrer, and seeing, does more mixing help? Does less mixing? Is it better that, or is it better or worse or the same? Check the clarity. Is it what you expected? Is it the same or as worse as that jar test you ran at the beginning of the trial, before the trial started? This is a great indicator here of what to look for in your flock tank while the trial is running. If you notice the billowy cloud look that you see here, this is the type of reaction you want to see from your products. You don't want to see large flock that are heavy, very like big gigantic snowflakes. You want to just see a very good cloudy, cloudy looking performance like that. As if you were to see things floating, or you see that it's settling too quickly, that may be an indicator that you need to cut back on your feed. Or if you don't see this kind of reaction, maybe you need to increase your feed. So you're checking for your flock formation. You want to note the size, the mixing energy that's required to get that, the water clarity, and you can see here we've actually got some separation that shows that clarity. You want the flock condition. Is it light? Is it heavy? Again, is it stringy? Is there foam? Try to duplicate it on the jar stir. You have these conditions happen. Any one of these, the too heavy or stringy or foam, try to recreate the condition on your jar tester, because you might be able to determine, hey, I'm feeding too much of my coagulant as opposed to not enough of my flocculant. You want to continue to check the overall performance, and what we're going to talk about here is your clarifier. What's going on in that clarifier? You want to document your sludge levels. You determine, are you creating too much sludge? I know of a trial that was run one time that it was performed so well, the trial performed so well, it created so much sludge that they couldn't process the sludge fast enough, and gave them water clarity they had never seen before. So it's important to stay on top of this kind of thing. And what you see here on the right is something called a sludge judge, which is a tube that is inserted down into the clarifier, and will draw sludge up into it. As the tube is pulled out, there's a ball that seals the tube so the sludge can't drop out of the bottom of the sludge judge. So you're able to pull it up and then measure your sludge level. Another way to do this is settling tests, and these are called Imhoff cones. And what we're doing is we're looking for the speed of the settling. Compare the speed of settling on the different samples. You want to check the amount of sludge generated in the different samples. And in comparing your sludge generation, you also want to check your clarity. Look for pin flock or carryover. That's what where you're looking for suspended solids that might be tiny little particles that are not settling or floating, whatever the case may be. And look for floaters. Again, all of these conditions here could indicate either underfeeding or overfeeding your products. And by checking this during the trial, there's no surprises. You're not going to get a jar, or a test result that comes off that's taken from the effluent that says you had high suspended solids during a period when it was sampled. You want to continue your trial settling test throughout the trial, and you can see here as we had different reactions in these different cylinders. And one on the right here, we have the pin flock or particles that are suspended that haven't settled. Our middle cylinder settled the fastest, and our cylinder on the left took longer than all of them. So in our estimation, the best one would be the middle as far as performance goes. So here we got a slow settling one, here we got our fast settling one, and then we have our suspended solid one that didn't settle all as well as the other two, and that could be an indication of undertreatment, or in some cases overtreatment. Now for a flotation clarifier, things are a little different in that we're actually going to be floating the sludge on top of the water, and what you want to monitor in this situation is your float blanket, how much is floating. You want to check your air lift, the amount of air. Look for stragglers. That means, do we have suspended particles that are taking longer to get to the top of the blanket, or not floating completely at all? And then you want to look for sinking flock on the other side, and then check for the recycle amount of the sludge. So we're going to check our flotation test, and one way to do that is, if it's not going to rise on its own, you could put Alka-Seltzer into the cylinder, and it will actually create tiny little bubbles that will get your sludge to float. You can also use an aquarium stone if you want to feel so inclined. Now, dissolved air flotation This is a good example here. You can see going from left to right how these tiny bubbles will move, slowly rise, and the whole point behind that is that as they rise, they're grabbing onto those particles, or attaching themselves to those particles, I should say, so that you form a sludge blanket that floats on top of the water. The things you want to look for are uniform bubble size, an even distribution of air, no large bubbles or burps, and no remaining pin flock in your floated particles. Continue to check your overall performance. Again, now we're going to look for things like turbidity, flock condition. Is it rising or settling? What the rate is? Do you have any carryover? Do you have foaming? Check your sludge blanket levels. Check your sludge production. Check your rake torque levels, and this is important. If you start to generate a significant amount of sludge, circular clarifiers have things called rakes in them, which they are designed to pull the sludge into the center of the clarifier. And if you put too much torque onto that rake, you could cause damage to it. So you certainly want to be ahead of that. And then check your recirculation rate of the sludge and other application parameters. Now this is important. You want to discuss manning your trial. You should have discussed this before the trial began, but you need to know, it's your job to watch your own trial. Do you need to split time? Do you need to have weekend coverage? So it's important that this not necessarily be a one-man show, because if this is a 24/7 operation, you're going to need to have people there all around the clock. And so you take turns. I remember doing it 12 hours on, and I went back to the hotel and slept, and then my partner, I relieved him, and he went back and slept. So we did that for about a week. You need to periodically check your inventory. This could be a problem if you're not watching your feed rates. You could have a situation where you run out of product prematurely, and that wouldn't be a good thing. You predicted to your customer that you were going to use X amount, and you wind up using, say, 1/3 or more, or maybe double. Then that could cause some problems for you. Remember to give your customer periodic updates, and then continue to reinforce those agreed upon performance parameters that you discussed at the beginning of the trial. And this is important. You can never expect it to go smoothly. There's a little Irishman named Murphy who will run wild on you at times. Expect some problems, have contingency plans. Don't let that deter you, and communicate your plan with your customer. But most importantly, you have to have a plan. Expect the unexpected. Things to expect, and this is not something you'd ever want to hope to run into, but sabotage. It could be from the incumbent competitor, or it could be an operator who's very loyal to the incumbent or competitor, and wants that person to keep the business. Never rule out anything. I had, not in a wastewater treatment application, but a different application in the feeding of a biocide. The ceramic balls from the liquid end of a LMI pump were moved so that the pump didn't remain primed, and I could not feed material. And it wasn't until I was standing there watching the pump come on and watching the product struggle to get up the discharge line, and I then tore the pump apart and found this situation the way it was. Now you're moving to the trial conclusion. You're going to present the results. These periodic reviews that you've had with your customer will yield no surprises for you, and no surprises for your customer. Your decision maker's already been identified, and the recipients who are going to get this information have been decided on, and the format that you're going to present this to them has also been decided. And you want to summarize your results and submit a final proposal. Factors to consider at the conclusion of the trial. Do you want to use up or dispose of the previous program? I always found that made the customer feel much better, that you were willing to use up any inventory they had on hand. Notify purchasing to discontinue ordering the old program. In most cases, the person that's going to make the decision might be the one placing the order, but never assume that. You could have a purchasing agent who is unaware that the trial ran and that there's a change going to be made, and you're the person, your contact decision maker might have a lot of balls in the air and forget to notify that purchasing agent. So it's always a good idea to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's crossed in this regard. Develop a clear understanding on ordering, and make sure you're fully stocked to continue. And that's important. Let's say that the trial is going along very successfully, and your customer says to you they're really happy, they want to just keep moving, go forward. Make sure you have product on hand, because the last thing you want is them to have to wait for your product to get in, arrive. In the meantime, the competitor gets an opportunity to put his product back on and could do something to save the business. Factors to consider. Be certain your products are labeled properly. It's very important. Have the correct SDSs. And develop and present an operating training manual. Now, I always liked to make sure that the operator was very well aware of what I was doing during the trial. And really, you don't have a problem with this. They're usually very curious to see how things are going and what ideas you have to bring to them. And so they're usually already know how the process is working, but having it written down is always a good idea. And make sure that your contact information is available to anybody that would need to contact you. Well, I want to thank you, and at this point I will turn it over to you for some questions.
Let me give you the mic. We had a few. Okay, Tom, we had a few questions come up. The first one is, how long would a trial run?
Well, I think that all depends on what you agreed on with your customer. I would say that in most cases you'd want a minimum of 3 days. A week is good, but optimally a month, because the more conditions that you can see and improve your chemistry on, the better you're going to have in terms of winning the customer over.
Okay, thank you. We had another question come up. Basically, can you speak to maybe using a pump curve to decide dosage rates?
That's another good question. Any of you know that the pump is rated to do X, and I always found that the pump that came right out of the box probably pumped a little bit better than what it said. So using the pump curve to say, if we know we got 10% speed at 100% stroke length, based on the output of 1 gallon per minute, would that be 1/10 of a gallon per minute? That's a good judge, but again, there's nothing to take the place of a drawdown tube to confirm that for you.
All right, thank you. And then last one, basically a question on how long would you suggest running a flotation test? One of the, I guess they're talking about either the test with the Alka-Seltzer or with the Airstone.
Well, I think you got to time that along with the process. And in a flotation clarifier, what you'll see is, as the water enters the clarifier, there's a time period that it will take to rise, and you want to mimic that as best you can. It may not be possible to do it with as easily with Alka-Seltzer, but an Airstone, where you can regulate the flow of air through that, might give you a better way to judge it.
Okay, and then we have a question here. Is a DAF used in lieu of a cone bottom clarifier for sludge control?
Not necessarily. The DAF really is dictated by the sludge itself and the likelihood of whether it wants to float or settle. For example, most metal sludges, such as precipitating lead, for example, lead wants to settle. Whereas paper, in a pulp and paper mill, paper wants to float. And so usually DAFs in that case, oil and grease, that likes to float too, so a DAF is used in that instance. So it's really more a function of the process and the sludge that you're generating.
Okay, one question, Tom, I can field this one. It was asking for the other presentations that we've done. You can see my email there on the bottom, kcope@brenntag.com. Please send me an email and I can send you the links or the PDFs, whatever you prefer, for those presentations. Now, with some of the presentations, we do not have the audio for those, but we do have PDFs for all of them. So again, my email there on the bottom, kcope@brenntag.com. So I think with that we will conclude. I think there is one more, Tom. Can you answer that one? Agree to that?
Sure. Janet's asking, can I speak about choosing an anionic, non-ionic, or cationic flocculant in combination with coagulant? What normally works best in a dairy application? Janet, I hate to give you a who knows type of scenario, but it's really dependent on the waste stream. We could get a little into zeta potential without getting too technical. Zeta potential is a measure of charge, and what you add to a waste stream will change that zeta potential. So if it moves it to the cationic side, an anionic is going to be the way to go. If it moves it to the anionic side, a cationic would be the way to go. But really the only way to know that is to take those anionics, non-ionics, and cationics and test them. However, I will say that in a dairy application, let's say maybe alum is being used as a primary coagulant, or it could be ferric chloride. Both of those tend to be cationic in nature. So most likely you're going to be looking at an anionic flocculant to give you the best performance. Now, where that anionic flocculant is in charge, is it high, medium, or low, all depends on just how it performs. There's other variables that could be come into play too, like molecular weight. But really there's no substitute for the jar test and looking at all options. You'll know very quickly just by the jar test whether you're heading in the right direction or wrong direction.
Okay, Tom, thank you, and I thank everybody for attending our webinar. With that, we will conclude it. And again, any questions or comments, they're my email address along with Tom's. Please feel free to email us, and we will answer your questions. Again, thank you very much, and this will conclude the webinar for today. Take care.